Welcome to today's lunchtime lecture, hosted by the GSSA and proudly sponsored by TerraCore Geospectral Imaging today and throughout the month of July. I hope everybody's had a good weekend. We have an important talk this morning, or this afternoon, sorry, on the South African Committee for Stratigraphy and what it's about and what it does. It's quite an important body, but it works a lot in the background. The presenter is Cameron Penn-Clarke, who has chaired the committee for the last year or so. And he is employed at the Council for Geoscience. He's a graduate of the University of the Witwatersrand, holding a BSc, a dual major in geology and zoology, a BSc honors in geology and paleontology, and he did his PhD in geosciences in 2017. He is an honorary research associate of the Evolutionary Study Institute at WITS. And previous to this post, he held postdoctoral research fellowships at Durham University in the UK, Ezekiel Museums in Cape Town, and the ESI at WITS. Cameron is an academic geologist by passion and holds many research interests within the realm of sedimentology, stratigraphy, and paleontology. He is the incumbent acting national secretary for the South African Committee for Stratigraphy, which is known as SACS, and is a South African representative for the Subcommission on Devonian Stratigraphy for UNESCO IGC Project 652. In these roles, he is variably helping guide, develop, and maintain stratigraphic research in South Africa, as well as keeping it abreast with international best practice and developments. And he is also a champion of geoheritage in the Western Cape. So with that, Cameron, take it away. It's all over to you.
Great. Thanks very much for the very nice introduction, Craig. I appreciate it. And yeah, welcome everyone. How's it? Hope everyone is keeping warm and safe during these troubling times. So today's talk is just an introduction to the South African Committee for Stratigraphy, who we are and what we do. And it's the first of many more educational series to come. So this talk is entitled Eating the Greens of Geology Because Someone Has to, and we'll get there in a bit. So just before I continue, just a disclaimer is that all the information in these documents are the sole property of the CGS and all rights are reserved, and that the findings or the contents presented therein are not necessarily the views, opinions, and so forth of the Council for Geosciences. So yes, so moving on, what is stratigraphy? I mean, we all geoscientists, we pretty much know what this is, but just as a recap, stratigraphy is a discipline of geology and it is concerned with the order and relative position of rock strata or their properties thereof relative to the geologic timescale. So stratigraphy can be described in a plethora of different geological properties. So this, you know, what we normally come across on a day-to-day basis is lithostratigraphy. We are used to stratigraphy based on lithology, but you get other forms, biostratigraphy on fossils, magnetostratigraphy on magnetic polarity, chemostratigraphy on a bunch of chemical properties, chronostratigraphy and geochronology, which are absolute and relative ages, allostratigraphy, which is not really used so much, but that's on stratigraphic discontinuities or correlations based on unconformities, seismic stratigraphy based on seismic data, sequence strat on depositional trends, and new sort of stratigraphic nomenclature that's coming through now, hydrostratigraphy being one of them, stratigraphy based on the hydrologic properties. So in the broader sense, Earth's geologic record is stratified and all rock classes can be described and classified in succession according to these properties. So if we just use this as an example, this is a measured stratigraphic log showing different rock units in a succession in, say, for instance, the Western Cape. So we know that these rocks have got different properties of them and they can be subdivided into a lithostratigraphy. So we know that this here has a strat section through the Bokkerveld group, specifically through the series subgroup. And here we have been able to use, on the basis of lithodemes of different rock types, subdivide the succession into alternating more mudstone-rich units and more sandstone-rich units. And below this, we can see as a stratigraphic discontinuity with the NAMA group. We also are able to describe the succession in terms of its age. So we can describe these in descriptive terms. So these rocks are Devonian in age, and this rock succession can be subdivided into different ages thereof, either being early or lower, a middle, and then also subdivision further into stages and ages. Now, it depends on, again, geochronology being more definite age constraints, so number-based age constraints, which we don't have over here for this part, and then chronostratigraphic constraints, which are relative constraints based on rock units themselves and not time. At the same time as well, we are also able to describe the succession in terms of its fossils. So here is just a hypothetical log of the occurrence of brachiopods. For my sins, I like these guys, but that's why I had to include them over here. But yeah, we've got stratigraphic ranges of different brachiopods. So these are called biozones, these sort of ranges of them, and these together can be collectively described within larger units called assemblage zones. And this is just one instance of using different stratigraphic nomenclature to describe the succession. We're also able to describe the succession in terms of depositional trends, so shown here by these upward coarsening and fining triangles as such. And we are also, from this, able to infer which of these packages are accumulated under regression, under transgression, etc., and in essence describing the sequence stratigraphy in terms of depositional trends. And at the same time, we are also able to describe this succession in terms of allostratigraphic units being stratigraphic discontinuities. So we know that we can separate one cyclothem at the top or one allothem at the top, being the Borkfeld group, from another allothem being the Nama group, which precedes it. We're also able to describe the succession in terms of its magnetic polarity, so whether it is normal or reversed relative to the polarity of Earth at present today. As you know, the poles do switch through times, and based on the lithological properties of these rocks can also have differences in seismic velocity. Again, they can also be stratified or described in terms of stratigraphy. We can also look at chemostratigraphy. We can look at how different chemical compositions vary. In this case over here, through delta 13 carbon or delta 18 oxygen relative to a standard. And we can also look at these changes through the stratigraphic succession and also through time. And lastly, here's another sort of scheme over here. Again, we can describe these lithologies and this stratigraphic record in terms of this hydrostratigraphy, whether these rock units act as aquifers, mini aquifers, aquitards, etc. So you see is that within one succession, we can describe this in very many ways. And this is part of the aim of stratigraphers and of local stratigraphic committees, is to hopefully one day every single stratigraphic sort of log through any given country can be or place can be described in very many ways. And I'll get onto the importance in a bit. So why is stratigraphy important? Well, it's the language of communication in geology. Without standardized stratigraphic nomenclature, what would we be doing? So it's an important tool in geoscience diplomacy, but communication is only effective if acceptable and standardized terminology is used, applicable procedures, rules, and frameworks are in place, and that these procedures, rules, and terminologies are monitored. Without any of this, stratigraphic action geology is impossible. So I use this example over here. I thought I'd get Old Testament in this talk. And this is the story of the Tower of Babel, the fall of Babylon in the Bible. And essentially what happened was these Babylonians wished to see the face of God. So what they did was they decided to build a tower to reach God. And then God said, no, you can't see my face, no permittance allowed. And what he did was he said, well, he or she, whichever heavenly being said, you know, right now I'm going to make you guys speak different languages so you can't talk to one another and you can't communicate. And then what happened was the Tower of Babylon, Babel collapsed. And you can see these people shrieking in disbelief. They are uttering things in, different languages over here. This person probably saying sacre bleu. This person here is probably saying may machtig marilis and variations thereof in different profanities. So this is why communication and standardization is important. So to sum it up quite nicely, this chap here, Jan Zalasevic, he's a very big name in stratigraphy and in paleobiology at the University of Leicester. And he sums up quite nicely. He says, stratigraphers are not known for their public relations acumen. A lot of this timescale work is used to be completely below radar. It was done by a small, dedicated group of people, and they never reached any headlines. Most geologists think of it as really dull work, and it's a lot like eating your greens, but someone's got to do it. So, but by no means a rock star type work, but it's quite important. It runs in the background. Like, keep the show alive. So going on to stratigraphic standardization, this is quite a big thing, and I realized this over the course of my PhD and then moving out of my PhD, is that there are a bunch of standardized rules, principles, and concepts for stratigraphic units, and these are discussed, ratified, monitored, and maintained by the International Subcommission on Stratigraphic Classification, the ISSC, which itself is a subcommission of the International Commission on Stratigraphy, and of which the ICS is a division of the International Union of Geosciences. So pretty much like stratigraphy, these bodies are stratified themselves. And what happens is that the ISSC communicates the rules and regulations. They discuss these rules and regulations, and they publish these in International Stratigraphic Guide, which is this book up here. We're currently in the second edition in 1994, but this is going to be changing soon. And any up thereof are published regularly in a journal called Episodes Chart. So it's quite a big deal. And within the ISSC, there are 17 subcommissions that keep it afloat. So 15 chronostratigraphic subdivisions. So for each major time slice in the stratigraphic record, one committee that handles nomenclature, and another committee that just handles the geochronology, so the calibration of the timescale relative to chronostratigraphy. So it's a very coordinated effort that keeps it afloat. And we much know that as the summarized International Chronostratigraphic Chart, a new one that is released every year. And this goes along with a updated textbook, the geologic timescale. So this here is for 2012, but this is for 2020. I don't have the textbook yet for 2020 because I'm broke. But the geologic timescale provides yearly updates to chronostratigraphy. And it's essentially a summary of the findings from the ISSC subcommission and circulars that are published in episodes. So again, this is quite highbrow stuff. And this information is important on a global scale. So just to digress a little bit, going back to the ISG and the abridged ISG, they provide clear guidelines for stratigraphic classification schemes and definitions of units. So these also give guidelines for what stratotypes are used and different stratigraphic schemes. So importantly, it provides definitions for different chronostratigraphic units, so different periods, epochs, stages, etc. So these are rock units that formed during a unit of time. So those are stratigraphic units, and geochronologic units. So this is a calibration of those chronostrat units to a time number. So yeah, it's quite important. And yes, and this is pretty much what the end product is that these guys come together, we will sit together, this is from the nomenclature group, and say, right, if you're going to describe lithostratigraphy, it should be in this succession of principal units. allostratigraphy, biostratigraphy, magnetostrat, you name it. Importantly as well, it also provides procedures and guidelines for publishing these units, which filters on down to regional stratigraphic committees, of which SACS is one of them. So these rules and regulations, as well as updates to chronostratigraphy, are communicated to regional stratigraphic committees around the world. In South Africa, the responsible body is the South African Committee for Stratigraphy, which we know as SACS. So the SACS is actually it's got quite an illustrious history. So it was founded in 1971. And this was due to discussions between the CGS, or back then the Geological Survey of South Africa, the Geological Society of South Africa, and the South African academic community. And these oaks came together and said, listen, oaks, we need to start standardizing this stuff. We need to make sure that we are together as international best practice. And so what happened was that SACS itself became an organizational member, a founding member, such as the International Subcommission on the ISSC and the ICS. So we've been there from the beginning. But more importantly is that we are one of the few remaining functional and quite visible stratigraphic committees left globally. So a lot of countries around the world have seemingly abandoned their committees, or their committees have just operate very quietly. That being said, is that in recent years, support for SACS and visibility of SACS has declined, but a revival way. Glad to say that we are seeing this. And historically, SACS has had very close ties together with the Council for Geoscience, the Geoscience Mapping Unit, of which I'm a member, or I report to, and its forebears. So our mandate is quite simple to understand, and our mandate just says we are responsible for regulating and coming up with guidelines for the nomenclature and definition of lithostratigraphic and lithodemic units, as well as biostratigraphic units, unconsolidated deposits and soils, all of which constitute the continental record of the Republic of South Africa. And you might have seen the most recent work that SACS, in conjunction with CGS Geoscience Mapping and Spatial Development and Mapping Unit in the CGS came up with. This is the revised geological map of South Africa. And again, we have got a very finely tuned stratigraphic record over here, and this is due to the efforts of SACS, of geologists around the country, in partnership together, working as one. So this here is a very nice summary to actually sit back and say, yo, that's good stuff. So the way in which SACS achieves its mandate is that it promotes the standardized terminology and nomenclature outlined through the ISG. And this is communicated through the SACS code, of which we are in our 4th edition, which came out in 1996. And the reason being is that there has been a new update to the ISG since 1994. Again, this is changing. It's in discussions at the moment. And as soon as the ISG is updated, the SACS code is updated. But at the same time, pretty much like the ISG publishes in April, is that we publish regular documents which are updates to the code itself. So the most recent one of which came out in 2019 by my predecessor, Kuni de Beer, and this was just an update to how we describe stratigraphic units based on an update that was made by the ISSC. So it's ready to make everyone's life easier who works with stratigraphy. So we could summarize SACS as a person of many faces and many roles. So SACS provides a structure for the regulation and management of South African stratigraphic nomenclature. SACS also facilitates discussion of these units, be they lithostratigraphic, lithodemic, or biostratigraphic. And trust me, like some folks really, get passionate about this stuff to the point where they get angry and storm out of meetings. We also look at arranging field trips or task groups to address contentious stratigraphic issues. So in this case as well, if there is a fight, we can take it outside, literally. We also are looking to arrange workshops to discuss contentious stratigraphic issues. These, of course, are important to have, especially in a quorum like this where everyone can discuss this. Importantly, SACS publishes formal descriptions of stratigraphic units. There's no point in doing what we do if no one knows what we do. So we obviously publish these things quite regularly. Make regular publishing available of codes, guides, and lexicons. This hasn't taken place in some time. Something that needs to be done in future. Well, we do plan on doing that with the revival of SACS. Importantly, there's the SACS database where all these data feed into a centralized system, and this database is imperative because it speaks to other databases. Stratigraphy is the common tie line that binds everything together. Within the CGS, we are an advisory to geoscience mapping on stratigraphic issues. So if there is a issue, say for instance in the field of one of our teams where they cannot figure out what these units are that they are looking at, what it means, its age, etc., or if we have to identify something that there's a big gap in knowledge, we of course liaise with CGS geoscience mapping and help them affect their strategy and their mandate. So we're good mates. We also have a strong role in quality control in CGS products, so looking at maps and reports to see if the right stratigraphic nomenclature and terminology is used, and assist in quality management documentation, including translation. So there are quite a few of these articles that are in Afrikaans that require translation so that everyone can understand. So there are many, many roles that SACS takes part in the background. So SACS does this in part by communicating these changes to the geoscience fraternity through publications. So these used to be published internally by the CGS, but as of 2015, these publications are done in partnership with the GSSA and are published in the South African Journal of Geology. So it's been a very fruitful partnership that sees a wider readership of SACS activities. So just to digress a bit, going back to all of the products that we have produced in the past, this is the SACS handbook. This is the Red Bible of South African Stratigraphy, and this was the first wholesale stock that was taken of South African stratigraphic units. So it was a monster of a task. It took, I think, from what I can gather in the old SACS records, just under 10 years to complete. And it's quite a big book. You'll see it lying around in university departments, in your supervisor's office, etc. And this set the standards for modern nomenclature and use. So it's the basis for modern lithostratigraphy. So at its core, it is correct, but it does need some serious revision now that times have changed and new units have been found and so forth and described. Then we get the sort of the SACS code or the SACS code, South African Code of Stratigraphic Terminology and Nomenclature. And this is pretty much just for the South African palette. It's the ISG translated for us to use, very simplified version. 4 editions. The 4th edition is still valid because no changes have been effected to the ISG. We've got the chronostratigraphic series. This again has used to be something that was published in the background. This OBM in particular was to set the limits for the for nomenclature that was used in South African pre-Cambrian units. So you might have sports words like the Swazian, the Randian, Valian, Macolian, and Namibian. And this was pretty much I guess a placeholder until these sort of scales that we're more familiar with were finalized and used. So this has been abandoned, and this was superseded by a publication by Altman et al. 2015, who's the chairperson of SACS, where we have abandoned these terms and we are using this pretty much neaten up the tail end of the batting order. SACS circulars, these are regular communications between SACS and the SACS community, and these are mainly just to provide so
Sorry, everyone. We seem to have lost our speaker. I'll try and get him back in. Just hold on.
Yeah, are you?
You're
Sure.
back. Can you share your screen again?
We'll do so. We'll do so.
The connection isn't too good. I'm sorry about this.
No, it's not your fault. There we go. Are we back in business?
It looks like it. Don't see. There we go.
All right, great. All right, great. So yeah, just going back a bit. So I'll just backtrack a little bit. So SACS circulars provided guidelines for the standardized descriptions. So this was recently supplanted by De Beer et al. De Beer 2019. And this is just revised guidelines for the description of lithostratigraphic and lithodemic units, but with more impetus on lithodemes. So this is sort of the way that we are looking at embracing mapping in futures, using lithodemic principles instead, but that's a story for another lecture series. So these descriptions, these are the guidelines that help descriptions take place and help us maintain our relevance. Moving on to the lexicons. So these lexicons, these were articles that summarize the naming of all stratigraphic units, the name changes, synonymy, validity, etc. And these speak back to the SACS database. So these are seriously out of date and need revision. So there are several offensive and defunct place names that need to be removed formally from the lexicon. And this is quite a big job. So there is some help that is required to try and get, once our SACS databases are up and running properly again, we should be looking at doing this. So ideally these lexicons should be updated on the fly, but that's comes in. SACS, the last bits are our lithostratigraphic series, the catalog series and the biostratigraphic series. So in the past, these were published internally in-house by the CGS. And these sort of detail the stratigraphic properties as such of these different lithostratigraphic units around the country. So there were two, the lithostrat series, which was slightly longer, and then the catalog series, which were shorter alternatives to the catalogs, was to try and get more of these out. That didn't seem to make any much of a difference. So both series have been discontinued. Then the biostratigraphic series, the purple book, only one was ever published. This was on the biostratigraphy of the Beaufort group. And this was quite a landmark publication because it gave us this biostratigraphic map of the Beaufort group. This is an update to the original map by Van der Walt et al. 2015. And the hope was that with the biostratigraphic series, we would like age successions around the country. But again, it just didn't get there. And we'll get there in a reason why this and other things didn't get there in the past and why we need to change things. And as is advised by the ISG, is that there has to be a legitimate form of publication of these units. Of any changes to stratigraphy, and it has to be in something that has got a wide reader base. So in 2015, in order to meet the sort of requirements of the ISG and the ICS, it was decided in discussions between SACS, GSSA, and the CGS that these lithostratigraphic descriptions would be published in the South African Journal of Geology, and these are quite regular. If you'll flick through them now and again, you'll get about 3 or 4, maybe more publications, that SACS publications, and of which the latest edition, the June 2020 edition, is quite an exciting one. This was a sort of revision of the Karoo biostratigraphy as a special collected volume. So SACS is quite visible now that it's in SAJG, and this is very important. So what's nice with these papers is that they allow for more expanded scientific articles to be produced with the lithostratigraphic flavor to them. And what's cool about this is that it's more attractive for people to publish in a rated journal, is much greater readership, and it's also, if you think about it, more enticing to and beneficial for young geoscientists to get them into the publishing game. Yeah, it's just a copy. This was my first publication ever in 2016, and it was a SACS description, SACS publication, and these sort of things are really good for young scientists. So all of this that happens in the background, it's not 1 or 2 people, it's a community of people. And this is what we must stress, is that SACS is a community. And it's a community that draws expertise from the CGS and the broader South African stratigraphic community. And there are several task groups, as well as a national committee. So the national committee, starting at the top of the food chain, comprises a chairperson, which is someone who is usually external, not part of CGS, not part of the GSSA, but usually a luminary of South African stratigraphy. The executive manager of the GSSA, the national secretary is generally the, which is me, person from the CGS, mapping manager, editor of the SAJG, and then 2 other ordinary committee members, and these can be from the CGS or external. And we have all these task groups that report regularly their findings on the stratigraphy of the certain units that they work on to the national committee, and from this is fed or captured by the secretary of the CGS and is passed on to the CGS for our databases and to mapping. So it helps us improve our maps. So then each task group itself, there's a chairperson, a secretary who is a CGS employee, and then 4 other committee members, which are generally people who are working on rocks of those type. So we've got Archean, Paleoproterozoic, Neoprote, Cape Supergroup, Karoo Supergroup, Post-Karoo, and Biostratigraphy Group, as well as a new geochronology task group, which I'm quite happy about with this group that we've just formed that this year. So in order to look at this in a stratigraphic sort of succession, here we can see is that SACS pretty much handles the entire stratigraphic column, and with the biostratigraphic task group focusing for now on the Phanerozoic, and then in the background the geochronology task group sort of monitors, make sure that all these task groups are up to date with the latest trends in geochron and chronostrat. So we have to look at what the future of SACS is, and looking at the future of SACS, we need to look at what SACS is at the moment. So a large corpus of our members across the board are close or at retirement age. These oaks, they're bullies. And a change of guard is required within the next 3 to 5 years. So as you can see, right now, SACS itself is overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male. Very few females and also people of color in SACS. So as with everything, SACS itself needs to transform, and as importantly, SACS needs to become more inclusive. Now, the problems with this membership tiering, and this year for the 2018-2019 period, speaks to what's going on in the country at the moment and in the past. So there's a large disparity at the moment between skilled professionals in any workplace at the 45 to 60 year age mark, and younger professionals, the 22 to 35-year-old age mark. There are very few people in the 35 to 45-year-old age group. And this seems to be the case everywhere. So young scientists, unfortunately, are still in training and less experienced, and generally, in an ideal world, the missing middle would have filled that gap. But now there is a vacuum in knowledge in that these guys are retiring very soon and things are going to collapse. So if SACS collapses, the capacity for South African stratigraphy and of geoscience itself will become compromised. So we need to start looking now at how we can affect change, how we can save SACS. So this is just to show, this is just a timescale showing major animals that went extinct throughout the geologic time period. And I really don't want SACS to fall in this sort of quaternary extinction event, the sixth mass extinction. We need to avoid this altogether. So when you ask yourself, people always say, what's the point of saving something if you don't know what it's worth? And you know, SACS, albeit not seemingly obvious, is that the products of SACS have been vital in the growth of South Africa. And because SACS has provided the language for communication in South African geosciences, and this in turn affects every aspect of South African geosciences. And let's be honest, this is the science that built our economy, and we need to be proud of that. It's a necessary tie point that is needed to keep geoscience research, exploration, and innovation afloat. And as you all know, with all these budget cuts that are going on, everything we do now needs to speak to the demands of the National Development Program to help grow our nation as an equal and prosperous one. And I'm going to show you now that SACS is a vital player for the NDP. And this, yeah, I was hoping that I'd have a castle to say this, but it all comes together with SACS and not with the castle, in this case over here. So, yeah. So a new strategy for SACS is currently being unraveled, developed as such. And this is a contingency plan to save South African stratigraphic research whilst meeting transformation and inclusivity imperatives. We are looking at doing this as well with an increase in SACS outputs and deliverables, as well as visibility. So to move beyond being visible just in terms of published manuscripts, having oaks like me speak to everyone is a way of doing this. So the strategy is hinged on 4 principles: education, investment, collaboration, and visibility. And we need to do this in we've got a 3 to 5 year gap to do this. It's not a quick fix. There's still time to do it, but we need to act now. So in the past, SACS has always relied on collaborative links between CGS, GSSA, and the South African Stratigraphic strengthened. But we do need to look at having more participation with university departments, research agencies, as well as private industry. So no one organization itself can achieve the mandates of SACS. It's a team effort, and importantly, SACS belongs to all of us. We all have a stake in it. And again, just to look at this of what these collaborative links, how we can take advantage of them. So by understanding the stratigraphic column, we can unlock more than just simple academic exploits. As an example, 2 examples, for instance, if we have to invest in fundamental geoscience tools, biostratigraphy, but in this case biased towards micropaleontography, we can look at hydrocarbon exploration and exploitation. This again is a stratigraphic tool that can be used to help kickstart and revive this dormant sector, which is going to become more important in the coming months since we are committing towards a low carbon economy. Lithodemic characterization of stratobound ore deposits, so in this case SEDEX, VMS, MBT deposits, etc. If we use lithodemic principles, these deposits themselves are reliant on if we understand lithodemes, these are intrinsic stratigraphic properties which control these. So again, by understanding, we can further these exploitation of these mineral resources, as well as their exploration thereof. So how can we do this? So going back to the principles, education and visibility. So there is a general lack by students to pursue higher studies. And let's face it, you know, it really isn't a very flamboyant sort of career. It's just you rock up at a bar, hey, I'm a stratigrapher. Oh, what's that? You know, more like being a paleontologist for some reason. But anyways, so most students, there are pressures at home that a lot of people don't seem to understand for students to pursue careers straight after their studies in mining, exploration, in economic geology. Much greater from young geoscientists from historically disadvantaged backgrounds. So the privileged few of us that are there, it's often beyond our comprehension why people from previously disadvantaged backgrounds have to make these sacrifices, why they can't just go and study further and so forth. So we need to be cognizant of that. There's also a trend of universities to focus away from, shift focus from fundamental geoscience disciplines. So stratigraphy, sedimentology, petrology, petrography, field mapping, structural geology. These are, you know, the real hands-on things in geosciences that universities tend to move away from. It's very easy to throw a rock in a machine and boop, there you get an answer, or you interpret things in such a way. But even bother teaching these things anymore, or if they do in a very, very basic level. And what's happened now is that we are seeing a lack of capacity in these universities, and also as well, not all universities are the same. We cannot compare a university in a
Sorry, everyone, we've lost Cameron again. We're trying to get him back. Cameron, here you come.
All right, let me share my screen again. Sorry about that. Back.
It's coming. Got it.
All right. Sure, thank you. Sorry about that. Internet is varies quite a bit, and that's just because of capacity more than anything else. So the SACS footprint itself is currently invisible in terms of education. So
Sorry about the connection. It's just, it might be the weather here in Cape Town. It's pretty awful at the moment.
Is jy vir jou gestem, Ellie? Want jou asem net my bietjie laag.
Someone's got their mic unmuted. Cameron, there we go again.
Sure. Sorry about that, guys. Again, I think it's the really bad weather we're having right now. The wind's really starting to pump again. But one of the ways we're looking at increasing visibility through education is to hold regular. We want to do this in conjunction with the CGS, the GSSA, university partners, as well as DSI, DMRE, and to try and see if we can get these workshops SACNASP approved. So in order to entice people to come to these workshops, to look at having these to count CPD points towards the membership renewal, could alternatively charge attendee research and or any other SACS activities in future. It's also a very important vehicle for new members, as well as a vehicle for debate and
Sorry, everyone. Cameron's obviously having problems with his connection. Here he comes again.
There we go. Sorry about that again, guys. Really bad. Sorry. Going back to the importance of these workshops is that these collaborations usually almost always on an informal basis, and these generally always take place at workshops and conferences, and usually around a beer and some free chow. So these we want to do more thereof. So we were planning on having a structure in our hearts, and now we're in a unglamorous. So I still wish to have this workshop done. Probably now it will have to be done in the digital frontier, as in this talk over here. And these are ways that we can familiarize people with the introduction to the standardized ways of reporting stratigraphy, the SACS way, advances in South Africa. Sorry, guys. So yes, these things are where we'd want to have them in future, and the idea is to keep these sort of workshops free of charge to make education more inclusive and more accessible. The other thing that we are toying with is looking at doing is making a zoomable SACS website. So this is an example from the BGS where they have an interactive map where you can zoom. Similar. Right now I've been working with Cape people in the Western Cape Department of Agriculture, Cape Farm Mapper. This is a very nice way to see stuff with something. No.
Cameron, how close are you to finishing?
Sorry
this
about that
connection
again,
is just getting worse.
So yes, I'm nearly done, Craig.
Okay.
So yes, this would be, of course, the future, what we'd want. The SACS website itself, we want to make this also more inclusive. So let's face it, education, geoscience education is not inclusive. Geology textbooks are expensive, written in English. Things usually are quite verbose, even for first language speakers. So the new SACS website, we wish to have a stratigraphic education component where we've got the basic introduction to the principles of stratigraphy, an abridged version of the South African. Also importantly is that it is all of these data are presented in different languages. So I want people to go and say, Giafuna is SACS or Kia Tuta is SACS, is that people will be able to participate in this collectively and we can do this together. So this is where quite strongly, we need to form partnerships with universities and other agencies around the country. And we've also got the SACS learnership program, which we were hoping to roll out at the SACS. If that doesn't happen anytime soon, we'll have to do this another way. And this was presented recently to the SACS community, of which everyone welcomed this wholeheartedly. And yeah, what we want to do is we want to pair up young scientists from the CGS and outside with SACS committee members. So say, for instance, you're working on the Wittenberg group and you're interested in the Wagen Drift Formation. You would work with the Cape Supergroup committee, and together you go through all the motions together of publishing this lithostratigraphic description of that formation. So the only way with fundamental geoscience disciplines to actually implement them is to actually physically do them yourself and to do them together. These things are group learned as such. So this is a way that we'll promote inclusive learning and also bring younger members into the fray. Lastly, as well, is this is again just speaks about with branding, is that in future SACS branding will be included on SACS publications, just to know that this is a SACS publication and this is what SACS has done, so it increases visibility. We're looking at also implementing new task groups into the SACS fold. The Geocron task group has been set up already, and that's currently underway and being developed. A soils and superficial deposits task group is also something that I've been toying with as well. If you think about where do landslides and that sort of stuff take place on unconsolidated deposits, the superficial deposits, you need to know these units in particular. Hydrostratigraphy, where are good aquifers? What are their properties? Do we see any trends around the country? Magnetostratigraphy, we've got magnetostratigraphers in South Africa, yet we don't have a task group for them. So again, who knows what discoveries are yet to be made if improvements to the stratigraphic column could happen. And certain of these disciplines are very vital for social and economic development outside of academic exploits. I've also started getting underway, having us to have a greater role in the ICS and the ISSC. My former host at Durham University is the chair of the ICS, and I've chatted to him at great detail about this, as well as looking at ways to encourage more South African stratigraphers to take part in these committees. South Africa has the advantage. You always used to say, you know, why aren't you guys refining this part of the timescale more, the pre-Cambrian? You've got so much rock. And a good case in point for us where we could have shone was naming of the Ediacaran. The Ediacaran, you know, we knew the importance of this. We called it the Nam, and we would have had the opportunity to name it, yet we were too slow and the Aussies beat us, you know. So we mustn't let this happen again. We must ride on the laurels of the World Cup and continue winning. And also importantly as well is that the ISG have invited SACS to take part in the new edition of the ISG, and it'll be on this next point now that I'm getting onto why it's important to have South Africa's role. So we want to start flexing our muscles a little bit more. So I've already started getting the ball rolling now, transforming and making SACS more inclusive. And this is by virtue of just inviting more people into the fold. And, you know, I can tell you now, the current SACS committees members themselves are not averse to this. They want to see it happen, and we are trying to make this happen. So we need to have more transformation taking place and greater inclusivity if SACS is to have a future. So we need to come together to, for transformation to happen. We need to help develop new young stratigraphers, but we also need to make sure that this takes place at all levels in SACS, in the SACS structure. So you can see this is 2018-19 period, 19-20 period, and this is the development that has been made. We've got more females and more people of color, and this is a step in the right direction. There's also the changes to the SACS lexicon that needs to happen. There are a bunch of names in the current lexicon that refer to places that no longer exist and offensive or inappropriate. So Transvaal supergroup being the big one, Transvaal doesn't exist anymore. Petersburg group, Petersburg doesn't exist. Zululand group, Zululand doesn't exist, and it might be seen as offensive. It's a name for an old homeland. You can't go around having these names around anymore. Bushmanland group, some people, yeah, there are big question marks around this term and name in particular. Then also you get the seemingly innocuous, a Skitterkloof member. Any of you can speak Afrikaans, translate it directly. It's funny, but it's rude at the same time. So these are frank discussions that we need to take place as a community and see what resolutions we can come together to rectify this. But importantly, we need to make sure that we continue abiding to the guidelines of the ISG. We are signatories, and this is how we show face to the world, and that these changes are taken seriously. So this in particular are things that there are holes in the ISG. There are no real guidelines for names that are inappropriate. There are guidelines for names that are defunct, but inappropriate names. And from what I can gather is that North America is having the same issue now, in particular with offensive names, as well as in Australia. And this is something where we together as a South African community can work towards rectifying the wrongs of the past whilst being leaders in this, being a bulwark to look up to. So in conclusion, SACS is one of the few remaining national stratigraphic committees, and it's an original member of the ISSC and the ICS, so we are OGs. We've been there from the start. And we've been quite fundamental in providing a functional stratigraphic framework and being put on the CGS, GSSA, and universities to achieve our mandate. And I'm calling on these structures to be maintained and perhaps even strengthened, and even expanded to include private industry. I'm sure that there's data and things that those folks are sitting on that will go top off. There are systemic problems afoot with the development of new young stratigraphers. My prediction is that this capacity will diminish in the next 3 to 5 years if nothing is done. So we need to come together, rally together to fix this. And this starts with educating the youth and investing in them. And this itself will hopefully drive things further. And also importantly, we have to transform and become more inclusive whilst we're doing this. So we need to evolve in order to stay relevant. And I want you to remember is that SACS belongs to all, and SACS needs you to continue growing from strength to strength. Importantly, we need to walk this road together, hand in hand, and at the same pace. No one must ever feel as if they're left behind. We need to walk this together. That ends my talk. Thanks very much to my employers, the CGS, for giving me this opportunity to be put in this position. It's quite daunting being a lightie to do this, I must say. So thank you. And then partnerships again with the GSSA. Thanks to Terracor for sponsoring this. And most of all, really, SACS, any of you guys that are in the SACS committees right now, I want you to go give yourselves a pat on the back, look at yourselves in the mirror, give yourself like finger guns or thumbs up. Thank you very much. This is all of your effort that has made this a success. Thank you guys, really. And if any of you are ever interested in joining SACS or taking part in these activities, please feel free to contact me. The work number probably won't work right now since I'm at home, but you can get me over email. So thank you very much, and a good day to you all. Be safe.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you for a very useful talk and a very useful overview of the South African Committee for Stratigraphy, which is quite an important body. We have time for questions and answers and comments. I'll take a few. Just unmute your mic, raise your hand and unmute your mic.
I don't know how to raise my hand, but I do have a question.
Carry on.
Hey, Craig, it's Kate here. I was just wondering if there's any way we could get hold of some of that workshop content, purely because it'd be interesting to learn more, but also because sitting at home and hearing about missing the workshop content makes me a bit sad. But also stratigraphy is fairly important, and it'd be great to learn more about it from my side, but also I think it'd be important to learn more about it in general. And then if the museum can help SACS at all, just shout.
Yeah, no, so with these workshops, as it stands right now, the workshop has been deferred over to next year, to be held at GeoCongress next year. We need to sit and chat about and see if maybe with GSSA sponsorship and even CGS support as well, as that we hold regular virtual workshops such as this as well. And also as well gives an opportunity for different SACS members and committees, so you can actually meet them one-on-one. At the same time as well, with these workshops are held, be shared as well. Yeah, so there's for now there's nothing yet at the moment, but it's once we've got buy-in for this, we can take it forward. And I think having first sort of leg of interaction with the geoscience community now would be very fundamental in demonstrating the need for this.
We have another person with their microphone unmuted, 933592. Do you have a comment or a question?
Hello?
No. Hi, Vladdy, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm not sure whether this is my number or because I couldn't find myself in the panel.
Well, this is you.
Okay, good. Yeah. So hi everyone, and hi Cameron. Thanks a lot for this very good talk and good explanation of what is SACS about and why it is so important. And as a chairman of SACS, I would just like to enforce what you have said and make sure that everyone knows that there is really a very, very big effort in achieving the goals you have stated, Cameron. Mainly, however, reflecting the population in the SACS committee, but the difficulties are that there is very little support for SACS within the geological fraternity. And SACS has perhaps a problem that it cannot depict its own achievements properly within the industrial geo-industrial fraternity. So SACS remains somehow little known and a paper tiger on the market, and it's good to have such a lecture showing how important we are. I don't know how to change things, however. As a chairman, not knowing this is a shame, but I didn't know that being for many years professor and head of department in South Africa. There is generally very little interest on academic work in even within the student fraternity in South Africa. So everyone sees it just as a highway to the next big car and to a good job, which unfortunately it is not at all. Because it's not at all, it is not at all the highway to become wealthy, the interest in SACS is even less. Maybe we should have some sort of a discussion of that in future within SACS, but also within the geological society and geological fraternity. The sign that these problems are spread all over the world, and other the committees for stratigraphy, national committees for stratigraphy, case to exist in many countries, reflects perhaps the general state of our society. I'm not sure. I don't want to be too philosophical.
Too late.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Vladdy. Cameron, I don't know, do you want to respond to that at all?
Yeah, look, I think, Vladdy, you and I, we're speaking the same language. We're seeing the same thing take place. There really does need to be a drive, I think, among all fundamental geosciences, is that I do understand that there are pressures that universities face, is that there are certain drives to develop certain specializations. And maybe SACS itself should sit on, maybe on the METF board body as well, when it comes to actually discussing the curricula that is taught at universities. To actually say, listen, guys, you know, you're forgetting about the fundamentals here. There needs to be more fundamental geoscience education that takes place. Yeah, and then also as well, I think was for SACS members to increase their visibility, would be a thing like regular workshops and lectures such as this over here in particular. And at the same time as well, maybe SACS, GSSA and CGS should actually sit down with the heads of schools, HODs of each university department around the country and have this discussion. Just say, look, we've got a crisis at hand. We need to come find a way together.
Yeah, certainly. You know, METF, I'm not so sure about. I've been trying to change things at METF for many years, but METF is not an academic body. They are there to promote the industrial impact on the academia, which is they good right. You know, they do an excellent job. But I don't think that is something to be superimposed on them. It would be also some conflict of interest of university members or academic members sitting within the METF, because they depend on the subsidies by METF. So I don't think that's the right way. But certainly all the others should come together and have more discussions on that. And maybe, you know, Cameron, I'm just thinking of, you know, your presentation is a great base for a short little paper on what is SACS good for. So maybe publishing some short description like that, and I would be happy to participate in it if you think that it would be useful. And publish it on our pages and in the journal of in the South African Journal of Geology. No, general description doesn't need to be reviewed. It maybe in the Geo Bulletin, even better.
Yeah.
I'll take that idea forward to the editor of Geo Bulletin.
I didn't understand what you said,
Yes.
Craig.
I will take that idea forward to the editor of Geo Bulletin.
Yeah,
and we can work on it there. I think I'd like to cut the discussion at this point. I'll take one last question if there is any. Going once, going twice.
I'd like to say something.
Okay, carry on.
Sorry, I should.
This is John James.
John James, yeah. It's really a statement. I find it pretty terrifying. I mean, over the years, we've suddenly had to learn that they aren't called, they're now spur fowl, and acacias aren't acacias. And now you think, when you start talking about it, we can't call it the Barberton Mountain Land, and the Pretoria series, and the Transvaal. It just, do all the names have to change? I suppose they do, but it's quite terrifying.
I agree with that a lot. Am I still on?
Yes.
You're still on,
Yeah,
Vladdy.
yeah, I agree with that a lot, but I also see the need to change many of the names. So it's the same problem all over the world in places where we have names for things, official things, not only in stratigraphy, that offend other people. Those need to be changed. However, you know, by printing the names does not, you know, you see South Africa is maybe a good example that changing names of towns and cities and streets is not helping the development at all. So, you know, if it just stays with a change of names, it doesn't make much sense. But we should maybe think about changing names and changing attitudes and changing policies and nomenclature. So all that together might be a better way to do.
Sorry, I'm putting my hand up again. From a historical point, changing the names is incredibly frustrating. And
yeah,
I said, because I'm a museum curator, I have to deal with things that have changed before, names that have changed, entire genuses of rock that have changed name. And it's incredibly frustrating because once you start changing the names, you have to make sure that you have buy-in from everybody. Because if just one person continues using the old name, it means that your filing system is completely out. And I have a huge problem at work where I have rocks that were collected by David Draper himself. And they're rocks that were found in southern Rhodesia, in a town whose name was wiped off the map, in a country that doesn't exist anymore. And trying to find out where that rock came from and which mine it came from and which country it came from. It's increasingly frustrated if you wipe that history away. So from my side, and it really is a discussion for a different day, changing the name of something, I realize it needs to be inclusive, but what you're really doing is trying to wipe away history. And trying to wipe away that history just causes far more problems than it's worth. But it is something worth considering, and it's, I think, and this is a personal belief, I think it's more important to become okay with the old name than to try and change it, because by wiping away that old name, all you're doing is trying to destroy that history. You're trying to forget the pain instead of accepting it.
Yeah, but that's what I meant. You don't need to wipe things away.
Yeah.
In the new name, you have to explain, you know, and those are the rules, international stratigraphic rules. You have to explain what the formation was formerly, where does the name come from, why it has been changed, when it has been changed, by whom it has been changed.
Yeah.
So this information must always be included in future literature as well.
Yeah.
I just want to add something else. I just see Silias Murray from University of Pretoria being part of this discussion, and he's an honors student at the University of Pretoria. I know him quite well, and he is a great guy. You know, we have a student involved there. Hip hip hooray! Silias, maybe you can get some other guys, you know, your colleagues and your pals from the university and get some students involved.
Okay, can I cut in there? We've got Nolene with her hand up. And I'll take Nolene's comment before we shut the meeting down.
You've also got one there from Tafik as well, eh?
Okay, so mine actually continues Vladdy's comment about Silias. He says, great talk. I'd love to get involved with this work. Good idea to get the universities involved. So there you go, guys. You have a volunteer.
Yes.
Okay,
Right.
I know it's Tafik. I'll take one last one from you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. No, thanks Cam. That was a good talk. Yeah, I just wanted to add in a bit. You know, maybe just from the side of the council. You know, we have a transformative agenda to abide by. So I think it's true what Vlad is saying, that, you know, as we change the names, of course, we stick to the, you know, the full fulcrum in terms of the derivation of the name and all the different names. But if you look at the lexicon right now, there's a lot of deeply offensive names that will have to change. So I don't think it's necessarily about like a, you know, the amount of effort and, you know, the frustrations with regards to changing name. But I think partially this is also one of the reasons why SACS is not maybe that visible right now. When you look at these maps, there's a lot of offensive names on the maps, and that tends to have a very negative outlook on the entire geoscience in general. So I think with regards to that transformative agenda, you know, we have to find the balance where we do this. And I'm glad that Cameron actually mentioned it in the talk as well, that it's actually about finding the, you know, the balance between changing the name and also remembering the history associated with that. But I think that's something we're not going to move away from. That's all. I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
It sounds very much like this is a workshop or two on its own.
It really is.
Will have to be scheduled some stage in the future. With that, I'd like to thank Cameron very much for speaking today. He's opened a lot of questions, which I think we need to think about going forward. So thanks very much for that. Thanks very much to TerraCore Geospectral Imaging for sponsoring the July series of lectures. And I believe we have the next one on Friday. So with that, I'll end the meeting. Cameron, can you stay on the line? If everybody else can drop out, that would be great.
Sure.
Thank you very much for an enlightening lecture.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Craig. You can stop the recording.
How do I get out of this?